Welcome to Containerized Conversations, where we containerize this conversation to less than 15 minutes. I'm your co-host, Jesse Caffarelli, and joining me is Josh Warhurst. Josh, how are you doing?
Hey, Jesse, I'm doing pretty good. And Jesse, today we're going to talk about one of the main job descriptions in the DevOps space, and that's SRE, right?
Yeah, so for our listeners at home, we've gone through a couple different iterations of what is DevOps. We've talked about platform engineering. I think was a fantastic episode with you. Now, we've already kind of iterated with our listeners back in our first episode, but DevOps is a culture, right? Now, how do you execute on DevOps is always different. So today we'll talk about SRE, which is, I don't know, what would you say SRE is?
Yeah. So the term site reliability engineer, SRE, was actually very confusing the first time I heard it. So DevOps, like you say, is the culture. And that doesn't mean that people won't say, hey, hiring DevOps engineer. I think an older term might be release engineer, right? I guess that's a different job entirely, but release engineer would be somebody who is mostly focused around the releases. A platform engineer focused on building out platforms that enable other developers. Site reliability engineer, though, when I first heard it, I thought this is actually somebody who goes to various different locations and checks to make sure that they're working.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit confused.
Yeah. So I think what I'm used to running into different companies, if a role says DevOps engineering, more times than not, they are talking about a release engineer who knows how to do unit testing, who knows how to do basically anything and everything involved with CI/CD, right? And to your point, platform engineering is more times than not is developer velocity. It's very focused around how fast a developer can get something from nothing to in production. Platform engineer is like very much involved in the tool sets that enables those developers to do that in a safe way. So SRE, more times than not, what I run into is really just someone who deals with production in a very simplistic terms. It's a team that deals with all of your prod sites and whether or not they're up or what's the reliability that they're up. And that's I think that's where it was kind of born. Going out on a limb, I actually think SRE was the first role of DevOps born from Google, and Google created this idea of SRE.
Yeah, Google did create the first SREs that I'm aware of. An SRE, you can definitely look at it from the perspective of how do we make sure that production runs. So like a successful site reliability engineer sees how like the developers are working on an app and they release the app and it has issues at site. And then the SRE says, okay, well, why aren't you able to debug faster? Oh, well, our logs take 20 minutes to get to us, and by that time, we don't know what's going on. And the site reliability engineer says, okay, well, I can figure something out.
Yeah,
they might
I actually
things like tracing. They might introduce different techniques that are more DevOps focused.
I'm going to interrupt you just a little bit in the fact that I do disagree with you. Everything you just said, I actually think that that's the function of the platform engineer, right? So what I said was a platform engineer deals with developer velocity and deals with the tools of a developer and enabling them to reliably deliver these to production in a safe manner. That is, in my mind, is a platform engineer. Now, could be wrong, 100%. In my mind, a well-functioning company has, platform engineer and SRE. And SRE is meant to catch those issues when they hit production. They're not necessarily responsible with working with the developers before it gets to production. And the reason why I say that is because of like the job functions I've had before, but like I do feel like an SRE has their handfuls with customers, right? In my mind, the difference between SRE and other DevOps roles is that SREs have to interface with customers directly. And so they have to manage those relationships. At the same time, they don't have time to consult with developers and figure out what is the best way to make the production reliable. They are only meant to catch when production's unreliable so that the company doesn't lose money from customer unsatisfaction,
Yeah,
essentially.
it's one of the roles of DevOps that I think is, again, that balance that everybody's
Mm.
still iterating and trying to figure out what works best for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you have the developers sitting around and caring about the ops every day, right?
Yeah.
Then they don't have time for development, right? You might have an app that they release and literally they're spending, 18 hours of their day watching how people are using their app and trying to fix things. And that's great from a DevOps perspective. It's a holistic approach. They're seeing how people are using it and bringing it back to the development. But often that takes so much time that they can't do it. And so SRE is doing a little bit more of the front end, without it escaping the developer's responsibility, right? I think the fact that the SRE is someone that they can see who's managing that relationship is important, because if it's just some nameless nobody, then sometimes you can say, they can suffer. Let me go and write this next app, right?
Yeah.
Let me go write this next function that is going to cause a lot of suffering.
Yeah, for sure. That's the thing, is it really depends on what's going on at your company. At the place that you've worked at with platform engineering, you guys actually had a product that was interfacing with customers. And so platform engineers at your company actually had their handful interfacing with customers. They may or may not have had time to interact with developers. And so SREs would have had to take over some of that role. So again, it does very much depend on what is the roles and responsibility of your platform engineers versus your SREs. Because at Google, the SREs were interfacing with customers. So they didn't have time to also consult with developers. There needed to be a separate team to help with that.
So, Jesse, what's the most successful SREs that you've seen? What has been a trait of a successful SRE?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's such a loaded question. But I would say the trait or the personality trait of a successful SRE is just a person who cares about customer interaction and experience with production, right? I mean, I think that's the baseline. If you think about how hard is it for your customer to use your product and how much of a bad experience it might be when you guys are doing deployments, that they like hit your website and it takes more than 2 seconds to load. If that concerns you, you are probably a very good candidate for an SRE.
So how does that differ from like SQA, right? SQA, we're testing the bugs. They're seeing how it works.
Yeah.
I've seen SQA people who say, hey, it takes 4 seconds to load. It used to take 2 seconds to load.
Yeah.
That's an issue, right? How does it differ from SQA?
I actually used to be in SQA. And I do have to say that once the bugs kind of slipped through, like I cared about whether or not we caught them, but I didn't necessarily at that point in time care about how the customer felt about them, right? So I was less focused about catching it faster than how the customers would catch it. And I was focused more on catching it before it actually got to production. And I think that's the big nuance, I would say, or difference between like an SQA and an SRE, is an SRE is trying to figure out how do we catch these issues before our customer catches these issues. So they've already slipped through, and I want to be alerted on the customer experience before the customer alerts us to that experience. Versus SQA is I want to catch these bugs once they're deployed before they're promoted.
I see what you're saying. So SQA is primarily concerned with finding the bugs before they reach production. And SRE is more concerned with, hey, any bugs that did get out, we want to make sure that they don't impact the customers as much as,
Or
we want
ideally,
to be able to detect them.
Exactly. Ideally, we roll back before the customer even notices. And it's a nuance that may be confusing, but it's completely different tool sets, right? For SQA, we're talking about Cucumber, we're talking about Capybara, we're talking about all of these different frameworks to simulate a customer experience, right? And so you want to hit those right when the deploy happens, versus from an SRE perspective, you're saying, I want to monitor what our customers are experiencing, and I want to alert exactly when those happen. And so we're talking about like Datadog, we're talking about New Relic, we're talking about Sentry, right? Sentry is a tool that you can kind of catch exceptions happening in your application. We're talking about things happening before they hit production versus things that are in production and what are our customers actually experiencing. And I think that's like the big difference.
What do we do after they experience those things? Right?
Exactly.
We say, 5% of our customers are hitting this issue that they shouldn't be hitting. Do we roll back?
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's great.
Do we keep it in?
Yeah. No, you hit it, right? SREs decide, okay, we let a bug through. At what point do we roll back? That's an SRE decision, right? That's not a QA decision. QA decision is actually no bugs, right? If a QA says, if I see a bug, it's not being promoted unless my manager says so, right? Versus SREs, they go, okay, how many customers are hitting this? And is it enough customers that we consider rolling back?
And is it enough of a bug that we consider rolling back? Right?
Yeah. Do we have a workaround that if customers do contact us, we can go, yes, we know it's coming out next release, but for now you can do it this way instead. That's actually perfect. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Or hey, this icon won't load. Okay. You know what?
We're very sorry. Here's a free gift card.
Yep.
Right.
Tell the developers, hey guys, the icon won't load for 5% of the customers.
Yeah, no, that
incidentally, the 5 that are using Edge, you know.
And that's exactly it, right? QA can only monitor so much, but maybe they don't even know that someone is using Windows 95.
Yeah.
And whatever older version, or let's say you use a cell phone app. They don't know that people are still on like the iPhone 2. You know, it's like, so SREs have to decide how much of an impact this bug is and go, okay, do we just like say yes for our 0.001% of customers that haven't upgraded to the iPhone 14 yet? They have to deal with this bug. I mean, that's really good insight.
There's a lot of jobs now in the market for SRE. I think when you look around at job postings, SRE has to be one of the highest requested jobs in the DevOps space. I think if you're new to it, I'd probably go to a bigger company that has lots of SRE experience over a smaller company that is trying to build out an SRE team if you've never done it before.
So the only caveat I will give to our audience members, if you're already kind of in the DevOps world, you know a lot of this stuff, but you haven't really heard of SRE or have been part of an SRE team before, and you know, you're applying for jobs. Hey, this SRE position's open. Maybe I'll apply to it. The only caveat I will say is more times than not, SREs are on call like 100% of the time. So be really careful if you're coming from the world of DevOps, where you're actually just kind of a release engineer and you're only working 9 to 5. You're not used to having to be on call 24/7. Ask those questions, understand the responsibilities, because SREs do tend to be working a lot more times.
An asterisk to what you just said, I think I agree with 98% of it. Actually, 100% of what you said I agree with, except that it depends on the product.
It really does.
If you have a product that is only being used, say, by dentists from 9 to 5, right? Then your support schedule might be working hours.
Yeah.
Right. And you might not be doing after hours support.
But
if your product is, you know, a search engine or some kiosk, right, that's using 24 hours, then as an SRE, you're much more likely to be on a 24-hour PagerDuty rotation or some kind of on-call rotation.
So when I worked at IBM, there was actually something we called Follow the Sun or FTS team. It's actually really funny. So the bigger the company gets, the less likely as an SRE you'll have to work 24/7, because if the team has a Follow the Sun team or FTS team, then even though someone needs to be on call 24/7, a lot of times they'll hire people around the globe. So you are realistically only on call from 9 to 5. And then when you're off, someone else in a different time zone is actually on call. So there are a lot of questions you can ask, and for sure it depends. But if it's a smaller company, they're saying SRE, just ask, like, what is the on-call rotation? It's a really important question for sure.
And with that, I think that's our conversation. SRE is a big job, and it's a big responsibility. I am Josh Warhurst.
And I'm Jesse Caffarelli. Have a good night.